All right. Our next group is a very unique offering. We're really excited to have Dr. Chris Troiano here, and he's going to present about these period instruments here. And this is Chris Troiano and the 8th Green Machine Regiment Band.
Thank you very much. My name is Chris Troiano, and today we are going to be talking about tuba quartets that were published in the year 1871. But before we get to that, we just opened up with a tune that some of you might be familiar with titled Hail Columbia. This tune was published in 1789 to commemorate George Washington's first presidential inauguration, and some of you might know it also as the music for the Vice President of the United States. The arrangement that we did today was arranged by me for the purpose of this presentation, just as an excuse to use all 7 of us that are up here. But it does come from a collection that we'll be talking about a little bit more today by a man named John Stratton from the 1860s and 1870s. That arrangement was taken from the collection that was originally written for full brass band, and then for the purpose of this, arranged for 7 low brass instruments. So to give us a little bit of context about what we're hearing today, contrary to what some people might believe about American music, bands and music in the United States did not go from fife and drum corps in colonial Williamsburg right to John Philip Sousa in 1880. There was kind of an important developmental part in between there throughout the 19th century with a lot of really rich and interesting history about bands and the development of bands in the country at that time. In 1835, we had the first brass bands develop here in the United States, primarily in New England and New York. Now, throughout the 19th century and 20th century, there were bands that had mixed brass and woodwind instrumentation, but for the sake of this presentation, brass bands began in the United States in 1835, and at first they primarily consisted of those instruments you see on the left: key bugles, natural horns, trombones, and ophicleides. There were a few other kind of novelties thrown in there too, but generally the general instrumentation for these New England and New York bands were comprised of those instruments there on the left. And then over the next few decades, the technology developed into many of the instruments that you see in front of you today, and we'll talk about those more kind of when we get to them later. But throughout the 1840s and 50s, brass bands became incredibly important in the United States. A lot of people would say that when you entered a town, you would know if it was a pleasant place to visit or not if you could hear a brass band playing as you entered. So brass bands are a really important part of town, the sense of community, and the musicians that were playing together and their camaraderie. Through the 1840s and 50s, brass bands could be heard in the communities playing concerts. They would play political rallies, they would play parades, and following the American War for Independence and the War of 1812, the United States military downsized and became more reliant on town militias. So each town would usually have a militia, and they would meet once a month to kind of drill and practice, and those militia meetings once a month would oftentimes have brass bands accompanying them as well. Then kind of the golden age of the American brass band was through the early 1860s. During the American Civil War, there are some estimates that say that there were 3,000 active brass bands in the armies during the American Civil War. And to kind of give a little bit of clarity, when we're talking about brass bands in the American Civil War, that is different from the field music. So field music would be the fifers, the drummers, and the buglers that were kind of the messengers and communicators of the day. That's separate. The brass bands were an entirely separate unit of musicians that were primarily there for entertaining troops and maintaining the esprit de corps. So we can see kind of, there's a little bit of a glare, but you can kind of get an idea. The picture at the top is an example of a brass band playing in a formation, possibly a roll call in the morning or maybe a flag ceremony in the evening. The brass band is over there to the left. The picture in the bottom left, it's a little tough to see, but on the other side of the fence there is a brass band standing in a circle. They are likely performing either a serenade for the people living at the house or just providing concert music for the individuals that are there as well. In the bottom right, there is a brass band leading all those soldiers on parade or on the march. The brass bands were very important to moving troops from site to site, either camp to camp or battle to battle. They would be marching in front of the soldiers as they are in that picture and leading them and providing music so that they could stay in step and stay in spirit. And then people often ask what happened during the battles. That picture in the middle right kind of gives an example of that. Brass bands normally would put down their instruments during fighting and assist with ambulance duty or assist surgeons on the back lines of the fighting. So the format of this presentation is going to be a little bit of talking, or in that case, maybe a little bit more talking, and then some playing. So we're going to jump back into now the meat of the presentation and play for you some of these quartets that were published in 1871. We're going to play two, and they are both by a composer named Karl Zöllner. He's a German 19th century composer who was based out of Leipzig. And these two pieces that we're going to play for you are going to feature the instruments on your left with the bell up orientation. These are Zöllner's Wedding Hymn and Retreat. Thank you. So to start talking about kind of the instruments that are in front of us a little bit, this graphic from a John Stratton collection is up here to illustrate that in the low brass family here in the 19th century, there were 4 voices of instruments. You see, starting on the far right, and note these are not necessarily drawn to scale, but on the far right you have a B-flat tenor horn, which will have the most narrow bore and sound kind of more like a valved trombone to us today. Mark Jenkins is playing on a tenor horn, a different maker than is illustrated on the screen, but a tenor horn nonetheless. And then the instrument with a slightly larger bore, but still in the same octave, would be a B-flat baritone and was often considered the low brass solo voice of the time. Hunter Swanson is playing on a baritone horn of the period. And then the part that's a little bit weird is the B-flat bass. Now, many of us would assume that a B-flat bass is like the tubas that we play in concert bands in high school and middle school. But the B-flat bass was actually in the same octave as the tenor horn and the baritone horn, just with a slightly larger bore yet. So the largest bore of the instruments in this octave, kind of more similar to a euphonium in terms of bore size and sound, but it served as playing the bass lines up an octave. Whoop. My instrument over there is a B-flat bass. I'm going to prop that up. And then the instrument on the far left, again, not drawn to scale, but we have actual ones here in front of you. Andrew Dougherty is playing an E-flat bass, serving as the bottom of the band here today. So these instruments were the low brass instruments of the day. There were some makers that made instruments lower than the E-flat bass, but they weren't really standardized in the ensembles all that much. And then similarly, we have the same type of voicings for these over-the-shoulder horns. Now, we'll talk about the purpose of those in a second, but you can see kind of going left to right, they're the same voices. They serve the same functions. Stephen Cannistraci is playing on a tenor horn. I am on a baritone horn. Dr. Dave Porter is also on a baritone, but it could possibly pass for a B-flat bass because it actually takes a large shank mouthpiece, whereas all the other ones are small shank mouthpieces. And then Dr. Michael Nickens is playing on our E-flat over-the-shoulder bass. So more or less, they kind of match over-the-shoulder versus upright from the outside as you go in, corresponding to where the people are sitting. Sometimes people refer to these as sax horns. These over-the-shoulder instruments in particular, sometimes referred to as sax horns. I like to say that calling an instrument a sax horn, generally, though there are instruments made by Adolph Sax and are sax horns, but generally, sax horn is kind of the generic brand name of these types of instruments. Alan Dodworth actually invented these over-the-shoulder instruments in the 1830s, and then Adolph Sax became so popular and so good at marketing that just anytime somebody saw a brass instrument, they kind of called it a sax horn. And funny enough, this E-flat over-the-shoulder horn is capable of being bought as a reproduction, not this exact model, but Wessex Tubas makes an E-flat over-the-shoulder bass that serves the same function as this instrument, though theirs has 4 valves, ours has 3 valves. We can see on this picture, again, pardon the glare, and the graininess for some reason. But this picture is taken from Lincoln's funeral procession in Washington, D.C. in April of 1865. They are all playing over-the-shoulder horns for the purpose of, like I said a few slides ago, the over-the-shoulder horns point backwards because these instruments were used for marching, oftentimes in front of soldiers, going from town to town, camp to camp, battle to battle. And the bells pointing backwards were so that the soldiers behind them could hear the music being played, to keep them in step and to keep them in spirit. The next 2 tunes we're going to play for you are by a 19th century German composer from Leipzig named Franz Abt. And this will be over the shoulders on this one. Thank you. So to start kind of talking about the pieces that we're actually playing, up on screen you see John F. Stratton on the left and his older brother George W. Stratton on the right, both men born in the early 1830s in New Hampshire. They were born to a musical family and grew up playing music, performing in bands, early stages of writing music, and then also became tradesmen as machinists. In 1855, they moved to Massachusetts, and in that year, John started his first music company, but unfortunately 2 years later there was a recession and it went out of business. So then in 1857, he moved to New York City. In New York City, he continued his life as a musician and a machinist, writing music, playing in music, John being a brass musician, and George, when John moved to New York, George stayed up in Massachusetts. George was more of a woodwind player and a fan of opera and choir music. So George remained in Boston and John moved to New York. And in 1859, John started another company down in New York, specializing in selling band music, and then eventually musical instruments and string instruments as well. John Stratton became so successful at manufacturing brass instruments that during the American Civil War, he was able to earn a number of contracts for the United States government to provide the Union Army with brass instruments. Shortly following the American Civil War, John Stratton visited Saxony, Germany in 1866 and saw that instruments over there were being made at a medium level quality, but for much, much cheaper. So John Stratton decided to open up a factory in Saxony and begin manufacturing instruments at a much cheaper cost and then shipping them back to the United States to sell in bulk and at a cheaper cost as well. It was around the same time in 1866 that John started publishing music for the military band journal. This is the collection that we're playing for you today. The first piece, Hail Columbia, coming from his second series of publications through the military band journal in 1868. And then in 1871, his brother publishing these quartet pieces that we're playing for you in 1871. George left his company up in Boston in 1871 and briefly joined his brother John's business down in New York in 1871. And we will pause there in the middle of the Stratton story and move on to some more of the quartets from that 1871 series. These are two pieces by Richard Seifert, another Leipzig composer in the 19th century. These are titled Pain of Love and Snowdrop. So continuing with the story of the Stratton family, this image on screen is a picture of their factory in Saxony that that John sought to start opening up in the mid-1860s. So as I said, George, his brother in Massachusetts, came down and joined John in his New York business in 1871. And if you've caught when I've been mentioning these composers for all these quartet pieces that we've been playing, they all come from the same place in Germany, and that is where the factory was as well. So we believe that John, being over in Saxony in Germany, got a hold of these vocal quartets. All of the quartets that we're playing for you are basically one-to-one vocal quartets to low brass quartets. We believe John found these quartets in Germany, mailed them back to his brother, who was in New York at the time, and then under George's name, submitted these pieces of music for publication as a part of this military series that John had started about 10 years earlier. Let's see. So an interesting thing, we might be doing this a little bit incorrectly, but all these quartet pieces, except for one of the ones coming up, they list a baritone voice, 2 tenor voices, and then usually it just says bass. So we have been taking that in our interpretation as E-flat bass, but in one of the pieces coming up, the third one we're about to play by Phile, he specified B-flat bass as the bottom voice in these quartets. So we may have the low voices erroneously represented here playing these quartets. He may have originally intended them to be 2 tenors, a baritone, and a B-flat bass like the upright I'm playing. But we think it sounds good having the low presence there as well, so that's okay. And the purpose of these quartet pieces are likely for either study, like just practicing them and getting better as a section, or as a different Stratton publication a few years later by a guy named George Patton, not the World War II George Patton, earlier George Patton. He said that specifically these quartet arrangements in the Stratton collection are very suitable to concert and serenading purposes. So it's possible that if a band had a really good low brass section, those low brass musicians could go out with these quartet arrangements and go to local politicians' houses, local community dignitaries, and serenade them outside their homes, trying to get some money if they're lucky, or at the very least some refreshments. We're going to move on to 3 more pieces. It'll start with the upright quartet and then move over to the over-the-shoulder quartet. These 3 pieces in order is a drink song by Zöllner, The Little Birds in the Forest by Dougherty, and There is Peace Above All the Treetops by Phile. Thank you very much. I want to take a moment to recognize the people that are here performing with me. Starting on your left and working our way around. This is Staff Sergeant Andrew Dougherty. We have Hunter Swanson, a recent graduate of George Mason University. We have Master Gunnery Sergeant Mark Jenkins, an adjunct euphonium professor at George Mason University. We have Stephen Cannistraci, a current doctoral student at George Mason University. We have retired Chief Master Sergeant and Dr. Dave Porter, adjunct tuba at George Mason University. And we have Dr. Michael Nickens, the director of the Green Machine Ensembles at George Mason University. The last two tunes we're going to play for you out of this selection is the totality of these tuba quartet arrangements from this collection. These two pieces are both by Felix Mendelssohn, probably the most well-known composer of the set of 11 quartets. These are going to be played in succession. So 2 Mendelssohn pieces to close out these quartets for you, and then we have a surprise for you at the end. Thank you. Thank you very much. So as you were able to see, most of the pieces, as I remembered to actually show them to you, they're all relatively short, right? Many of them in score format, only taking up 1 page. And the music, in terms of the range and the rhythms, not all that entirely difficult. So these pieces of music could be very good supplements to possibly younger quartets, or really quartets of any age that are trying to really hone in their ensemble playing and their musicality. I actually heard today that Jay Crush, a fellow tuba player among us, actually uses these quartets with his students. All right, so before we leave you today, we have a number of special thanks. Thank you to Mark Elrod and to BJ Pino for helping us out with these instruments. Yes, clap, clap, clap. Thank you to Adam Lassard, Jeremy McBride, and the rest of the Tuba-Euphonium conference for helping us out today. Thank you to the musicians here on stage. Thank you to Green Machine Ensembles, the Dewberry School of Music, and George Mason University for allowing us to come here today, and to all of our family and friends for the support. Thank you all very much. We are going to close out our recital with another combined piece. We opened up with Hail Columbia. That was a full band arrangement, and I made it tubified. We're going to do the same thing with this last piece of music. This is Old Lang Syne. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the workshop.